Brilliant. So, welcome to our session today. Thank you for everyone who's joining us. And I think that it should hopefully be a kind of really useful and interesting session. I'm here with Laura Williams from Thrive Law, and hopefully we're going to be able to give a kind of combination of both of our experiences around neurodiversity and creating a kind of neuro-inclusive culture at work. So I would like to first hand over to Laura to introduce herself and Thrive.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again for joining us today. Hope you find the discussion engaging. I have been practicing as a solicitor specialising in employment law for around 17 years now, and I support companies of all different shapes and sizes, from day-to-day HR matters right through to large-scale projects and strategy. And one of the things that we are really passionate about, and ties in absolutely with our values at Thrive Law, is championing mental health and supporting neurodiversity in particular. And we recently earned recognition from the Solicitor Regulation Authority, Law Society and ACAS for the work we've done around this. So I'm really happy to be here today partnering with Matthew to talk to you all about this topic and, as I hopefully share some insights from our experience.
That's great. And yeah, hopefully it just gives a nice combination of like day-to-day like impactful strategies through to that kind of more legal angle and aspect in terms of how to kind of meet that compliance. So my name's Matthew Timmis, and I'm the co-founder of Aim Forward, and we have I have over 20 years in the neurodiversity and disability sectors, with experience working from individuals through to organisations, both in the workplace and in education settings. And I would say that like my passion is being able to enable both people and teams to perform at their best. And that's where Aim Forward was born. The team around that have delivered over 10,000 assessments to individuals across organisations and education settings, and we can hopefully help in kind of inclusivity journeys, support neurodivergence, mental health, and also physical health. So what are we hopefully going to cover today? So this is like the second in a few webinars, so a bit of a series of webinars that we're collaborating with Thrive Law around. And in the previous webinar, which if anyone didn't attend, if you just email, you can email hello@Aim Forward, or get in touch with Thrive and ask for a recording of that previous session. But just as a little recap for anyone who wasn't able to attend, we looked really at the kind of starting points of creating a kind of neuro-inclusive culture, starting with like what is neurodiversity, what's the language that's used around it, then through into what is a disability in terms of the Equality Act, and then through to like reasonable adjustments and strategies and how to kind of start to embed them. It was very much a kind of starting point on this neuro-inclusive journey. And today we really want to be able to kind of expand on that. It's going to be much more of a kind of conversational approach with myself and Laura. We get asked lots of questions, and that's where we're going to kind of work on today. Like, what are the key questions that we get asked in our kind of everyday working life, and hopefully then be able to kind of answer them. And I'm going to be able to learn loads as well as you guys from Laura. So hopefully it'll be kind of that kind of conversational approach in terms of looking at how to support neurodivergent employees at work, but both in a kind of like everyday kind of simple strategies through to maybe more complex ones, but also then like what does the law expect from you as an employer, and also then as an employee as well, how your organisation can help you. But in terms of just a very brief refresher, we're talking mainly around kind of neurodivergent conditions. So what that might be is could be from autism, ADHD, dyslexia, for example, but also try to think about mental health conditions and other disabilities are all relevant to the concepts that we're discussing today. And you'll hopefully be able to see in this agenda here, these are the basic questions that we're going to kind of run the session around. So what does day-to-day support look like? What should or shouldn't managers be doing in terms of neurodivergent members of their team? what are myths or missteps, what do we do when an employee discloses, and also how do you build a culture where people feel safe and able to speak up. So I will just stop sharing our slides, and then hopefully we can have a much more natural kind of conversation about all things in the neurodiversity sector. So over to Laura.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, this from my perspective, this is for anyone really working in HR and people and culture who may have as part of their role a focused responsibility for diversity, equity and inclusion, or just in general leadership roles. And we also know that some of you joined today might be neurodivergent yourselves. So we really want to give you a feel for the kind of support that really makes a difference and how to approach them from a legal perspective, but also hopefully without feeling too overwhelmed. And really today, what the really hope for us is that it builds some confidence. And obviously, if you do have any questions or need additional support, then as I say, please don't hesitate to get in touch with Matthew or I following the session as well.
That sounds great. I've just actually launched a little poll. We'll add some polls as we go through, and to look at. So at the moment, it's just like, what is your job title? It gives us a little bit of a flavour in terms of the angle of this session, so that we can add most value to there. So we'll be able to get those results. It's really helpful. And then being able to kind of hopefully take away lots of interesting ideas, but also being able to share some of the experiences in this session with maybe your team members or colleagues. And then if you're thinking like we really need to do a bit more around the world of neurodiversity, then you can get in touch with us and connect afterwards as well. So if you've got any questions, we can definitely help, but also just trying to help start that conversation amongst your team so that people can start to feel comfortable having those conversations.
No, absolutely. I'm happy to help any follow-up questions anyone might have if they feel they might benefit from some further advice and support. And I think if you agree, Matthew, this is a really important topic right now. Obviously, there's lots of chatter around the Employment Rights Bill in particular, which is really going to change the shape of employment law, really, and what we need to do from an HR perspective. But whilst it's not directly in the legislation proposals at the moment, a really clear theme and something that government will be following through on is a real emphasis on businesses and supporting what they class under the Equality Act as disabled employees back to work, and that can include both physical as well as mental impairments, and many neurodivergent conditions will qualify as a disability for employment law purposes. So, I mean, hopefully it's part of our culture, it's something we want to support on and get the best out of people going forward anyway. But from a legal perspective, it's going to become an even more increasingly important conversation in the next couple of years as well. So on that point, without further ado, let's jump straight in. So my first question to you, Matthew, in your experience, what does day-to-day support for neurodivergent employees actually look like?
So big question, but from a kind of practical side, I think that one of the misconceptions almost is that neurodivergent support has to be high tech or really expensive. And I think managers and employers and leaders are a little bit nervous about how much resource and money it's going to take. But actually some of the best adjustments are incredibly simple. I think I like the phrase, small adjustment, big impact. And it can be really tiny little changes. Examples might be like clearly written instructions or a different way of communicating with your team, asking those questions. How do you like to be communicated with, maybe before a meeting, in terms of getting and sharing agendas, flexible working patterns. So people get a little bit nervous in terms of working from home or flexible working, who shouldn't have access to that. But actually, if you look at little adjustments with flexible working in terms of start finish times, if the office is super busy bang on 9 o'clock, then an individual with maybe sensory difficulties would really benefit from a 15-minute window to start earlier than that big rush, or 15 minutes later. So they're not working less or more, but they're able to just be a little bit more flexible so that they can be as productive as they possibly can be. And then through to some basic tech, like headphones, or maybe limiting video calls, or having like quiet spaces within the office if it's a large open plan office, being able to kind of find those kind of different areas. And so I just wanted to launch one more poll in terms of just getting a feel of, like, is this something that people have done before? So have you, just a yes, no, quite simple, have you ever put in place a reasonable adjustment before? That's what we're going to be talking about quite a bit today. And it's interesting to get a take of how many people have actually experienced that. But in terms of those simple adjustments, so maybe flexible working or different communication styles, from your side, Laura, how does that fit in terms of like a legal perspective?
Yeah, they absolutely count. They're really good examples of reasonable adjustments in the Equality Act, and there's a legal obligation on employers to put those in place where they have an employee who's classed as disabled under the Equality Act. It's also really important from a business culture perspective, in my view, as well, because if you're helping employees feel valued and showing they can really thrive in their roles, and that can obviously, it benefits you from a productivity perspective, but also it helps avoid attrition, which you know is a real concern for businesses at the moment. We have, especially in the current climate, businesses are running in quite a lean framework in terms of their staffing. So it's really important to hold on to those valued colleagues and really truly get the best out of people. And if they can help reduce the barrier that someone's experiencing and they're reasonable for the business to make, that for me is what really counts. And obviously it's important to remember that you don't need a diagnosis on paper to justify them. And so if someone comes to you asking for support, if you ignore those needs that someone's expressing just because you're waiting for a formal legal label for it, it's actually a big legal risk for employers. Yeah,
and I think that if we're delivering a like workplace needs assessment, for example, or some coaching, it's not necessarily about the actual adjustments. It's almost about that kind of sense of feeling heard, or feeling understood, validated, or empowered. And also then I think for managers to understand that the difficulties aren't a choice. It's not a kind of I'm choosing to behave like this or act like this, or I'm choosing to not be organised. It's part of that potential diagnosis. But then also to always be aware of, if you are talking about areas of difficulty, to also balance that out with strengths, particularly in kind of conversations with line managers, to be focused on those positive areas. And changes to productivity can basically come from two key sources. It's one, it's to highlight the strengths and really enable them to kind of thrive in their strength areas, or to remove some of those barriers. And so the recommendations that we make and the conversations that you guys might have is being able to, choose one of those two, but being able to focus on the strength areas as well as any areas of challenge or difficulty.
No, I absolutely agree. I think communication is really key here, isn't it? And having the conversation is going to be the most important thing. And obviously there's legal obligations and compliance, which we want to make sure we're reducing our risk in that respect. But it's so important to focus on the human side. And the starting point for me, and something I actually talk a lot about in my practice when I'm supporting my clients as well, is creating that psychologically safe space for employees to be able to have, to enable managers to be able to have those conversations, but also for your team members and employees to be able to come forward and explain what it is that they need to be supported in the right way, carrying out their roles.
Yeah, and it's difficult to do that. It's not easy. You can't just kind of click fingers and it just happens. There's normally something that would trigger that. And as you say, it could come from I guess like training. So if you deliver a kind of just even an awareness, a basic neurodiversity based training session, the training session is useful, but really it's the conversations that happen outside of that between colleagues, or, oh, I experienced this, or I have traits of this, or it starts to build those conversations. And if people feel comfortable disclosing that, then that's where you get big wins. And being able to could come from a training perspective, but also then being able to access that from a workplace needs assessment perspective. It's quite individual. It really spent 2 hours with that individual talking about them. There's no way that's not going to produce conversations afterwards and start, whether it's communication with colleagues or managers, whatever it might be. It's just about finding certain hooks to start those conversations around, because it's more difficult to just happen out of the blue.
I think it's got to come from the top, hasn't it? I think it's really got to come from your leadership teams, essentially. And if appropriate, showing some vulnerability. I've seen that happen really effectively in practice. And obviously, the nature of the work that we do at Thrive, we obviously get a lot of requests. We do a lot of training with clients on neurodiversity in particular, and creating awareness for staff teams and how that support can be put in place. But often we'll have the conversation, we're preparing the training, and actually it lends itself to a broader conversation. What we end up doing is actually some workshops with the senior leadership team in the first instance, because you've got to have that, but it's got to come from the top down in terms of creating that space and that culture around your business. And there's some, we've touched on earlier, sometimes the solution can be quite simple, but it's really important that runs through the beating heart of your business, and there's some really effective strategies to be able to do that as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think the most recent example for me was we delivered a talk to a national talk to surgeons at Harrogate last week, and in the room at the Q&A afterwards, top surgeon, top of their field, disclosed a recent diagnosis of a neurodivergence, and had never done that before, never told anyone apart from family members, and was brave enough to stand up in front of their colleagues at a really prestigious event and share that. And it was definitely nerve-wracking, but it was so much conversation then started from that, and was generated from that. And it's about that kind of, if leaders can share some of that vulnerability, I totally agree. Can be super helpful. One other poll, hopefully so in terms of the results of the polls previously, so 73% of the audience today have implemented a reasonable adjustment within their team. So that's really interesting. Great to see that kind of experience, and hopefully for others, if it's relevant or not, getting that confidence to be able to do that. Let me just start this next one in terms of how just to rate your kind of your personal confidence in terms of neuro-inclusive practices and kind of neuro-inclusion in the workplace will be a really interesting one for us to see. And we might do another poll at the end just to see how your confidence has changed after we've spoken. Hopefully doesn't decrease, but we'll see. So on to question 2, and again, really popular one that we often get asked is what should or what shouldn't. So what should managers be doing to support neurodivergent members of their team? What's your thoughts on that one, Laura?
I mean, this is a really important one from a legal perspective, and it ties in with the point about communicating your business culture and complying with the requirement to make reasonable adjustments. And because obviously it's really important, businesses can obviously be vicariously liable for the actions of their staff, and managers are often a bit of a first line of response. And so if they mishandle a situation and things can escalate, obviously there's potential legal liability there. But I think from a practical perspective as well, it might result, if it's mishandled with a particular employee, it can result in longer term absence and potentially grievance procedures being initiated. And the law does expect a level of understanding and action on employers where someone discloses that they have a disability. So we obviously appreciate today we're talking about neurodivergent competition specifically. So if someone raises a concern or request for support and it's ignored, that's really where problems can occur, and ultimately in the worst case scenario ends up in a tribunal claim, which obviously we want to avoid. So I think the starting point importantly here for me is assessing your manager confidence. It's really quite common, we see this incredibly commonly actually, where people are often promoted into managerial positions because technically they're very strong and competent in their particular technical area. However, your management skills might not be an actual thing for them, so it's really important that they are supported and their knowledge is supported, particularly in having to deal with these situations. And that's also where your own policies and procedures can come into play. And are they well communicated? They're not just sitting there in a handbook which looks lovely on a shelf somewhere. Are you actually communicating? And as a manager, are you feeling supported and understanding what would you do if someone came to you and said, this is why I need to disclose this information to you, I need help? Do you know what to do? So I think giving the managers in your organisation knowledge and understanding is really essential here, and to aid those conversations, even if at some point they will need to escalate and obtain a further support from. If you have someone who's an HR manager in your organisation, or if you have someone who's responsible for that, or even as a founder-led business, if you're helping support the manager in that way. I mean, is this something you tend to see in your practice, Matthew?
I think so. I think that what we tend to see is certainly within workplace needs assessment. I think 5 years ago, it was very focused on the individual, and obviously it still is focused on the individual having the workplace needs assessment, but actually it's the benefit that the managers get from that process as well, and the conversations that can happen around that. But what I would say when we have conversations with managers is that they really want to help. They just don't quite know how to, or what the right words to say, or the language to say. I don't want to offend, so I'll just not say anything. And that's kind of all the best intentions. It's kind of as bad as doing something wrong in the first place if you're not doing anything. Or they might push performance conversations and kind of ignore some of the conversations around neurodivergence or a specific, like a mental health condition, for example, because they're so focused on that productivity bit. It's like, actually, it does need airtime, it does need to be talked about, and how are you going to approach that? And some of these conversations are very sensitive. It can be quite difficult to do that. But as you learn a little bit more and get more knowledge and comfortable, it's really helpful. What I would say within that, from a manager's perspective, if they are overworked, which they quite often are, or under-resourced, then how do you fit this kind of knowledge gain in? How do you have those kind of conversations? But if you can maybe build little hooks around certain areas, or you can really see the benefit of actually supporting your team, you'll make that space and you'll find those opportunities. So I think if I was looking at some like practical tips from what we see, I think definitely don't wait for disclosure. If you've got a new member of the team, then I find it hard to not think of some of the questions that you might be asking throughout that induction period or probation periods, where you're not digging for that information, but you might be asking, what can we do to help you do your job best? Is a question that might bring up some information. Ask what would help. What has helped previously, like look back and ask things did work or didn't work, because ultimately if you strip that back to productivity or well-being, these are all going to be helpful for the organization, not just for that individual. But also looking, so that's one area. I think another area would be like tagging some of these questions into certain tasks that you already do. So an appraisal might come to mind for in PDP sessions. You might have like a kind of mind do a really good like mental health check, which is a series of questions that's created by mind. So you feel that you can use that. It's like, I've not said the wrong things, and you can bolt that into potentially an appraisal process or a period of time that you can start to generate those questions from. And it's for every employee. And so you'll see what kind of conversations and communications come out of that. Other times where it's not like specific that you've organised it, it would be where you're looking for like little signs of difference, or if there's maybe like signs of burnout, if someone's saying they're stressed multiple times, or if you ask someone how they're doing and they just go fine and don't really expand on that, like what is actually happening. And you might see masking, you might see overcompensation, and that's really exhausting and can definitely lead to burnout. So it's your role as that manager to be able to just identify some of those key points. And then with, I guess arming managers with experience and knowledge, so training courses that aren't just like tick box, okay, right, we'll put that back in the drawer and forget about it. It's like, oh right, okay, that's really useful information, I'm going to be able to embed that into my practice. But I think if you strip everything back, really, not even talking about neurodiversity here, it's about being genuinely and authentically interested in that individual. And I think if you do that as a manager, my best managers have been genuinely, authentically interested in what I do, and to help both me in my role, tasks, goals that are being set, but also in the organisations. If you're inquisitive and asking open questions that are positive, then you're going to be able to find out the right solutions, I think, through that process. What's your take?
I was going to say, it's the importance of empathy, isn't it? And I think, it doesn't matter what size of organisation, whether you're a smaller business, whether you're a very large scale business, I think checking in with your team is such a simple thing. And it's something actually, I think people are getting much better at, but commonly you see, a key checkpoint is sometimes someone's one-to-one time with their manager can be their annual appraisal. Like, we're leaving it a whole year to have that proper, true invested time to be able to have those conversations. We're all busy our day to day, but certainly if you want to get the best out of your teams, it's so important. So have those regular check-ins. I think also, so you can, it's important to have those conversations. If you notice someone's behaviour changes, for example, or their performance change, whether it's a role change or something might be going on, you think, I think just pausing to reflect and think, is that out of character? Is that normal for them? Let's have a conversation. Are you okay? We do, so when I'm advising businesses, sometimes these issues will come out of perhaps some concerns about someone's performance. So we're going down the road of discussing how we can manage a performance management process, and sometimes out of those conversations someone might disclose that actually they're struggling or they're awaiting a diagnosis, and there's certainly, if there's reoccurring themes, it's just pausing to reflect and understand, well, where's this coming from, what might be the reason for this, and that can obviously aid any, if it is truly they need support with the from a performance management perspective, it helps you to put the right supports in place. So hopefully you haven't got to go through this long, lengthy performance management process for everybody. Those issues can be resolved with a bit of training and support. But if someone does need reasonable adjustments to support them in that role, again, you can put those in swiftly, effectively, and quickly. And as I say, ensure that they can really thrive in the role that they're doing. And again, I know you mentioned it earlier, but this is why it's really important, even from the legal side of things. If your manager isn't trained or feels confident in dealing with these kind of issues, and they fail to act, either they just don't know how to deal with it, or they sort of skim over it, the organisation, your business is still vicariously liable. We can't just say, oh, we didn't know as a business, because if poor manager decisions can lead to some of the most costly mistakes we see, and unfortunately that might result in, as I say, in the tribunal settings if things are handled poorly. And it can also, things can escalate from a practical point, even before we get to the point of maybe a claim has actually filed. It can take more time to manage, more energy, resource to try and resolve relationships. We have a disengaged individual in a day, we might be resolving long-term sickness out, for example, if it's triggering, stress and in worst cases depression and lengthy time away from work, which ultimately is going to have more time and cost to the business. So it's really important to address these issues as early and as confidently as possible.
Yeah, I think so. And in terms of viewing them as also as not a nice to have, any adjustments that are put in place, it's not a kind of, oh, we should do this because it's a nice thing to do, trying to flip it. So it's like, actually, this is going to make this individual more productive, it's going to make the team more productive, it's going to make the organisation more productive, and kind of switching that viewpoint from like a resource, like a negative outlay of either finances or time, to this is going to add loads of value. But another thing as well is giving, like, I do this a lot, is giving like vague feedback or indirect feedback. So I'm probably not the best person to talk about it, but I don't want to kind of offend, or but actually so many of our neurodivergent employees would actually be like, actually, no, Matthew, I need to know what it is that you actually want, and is it this way or this way? So adding that clarity, be kind with it, but you can be really direct and specific, so that it's not kind of woolly or yeah, without that clarity. But yeah, I can hold my hand up and say I do that sometimes. Anything else from your side, Laura?
Yeah, I think, in terms of, so we talked about what possibly we can do in terms of instilling that confidence, but I think in terms of what ultimately managers should stop doing, I think it's assuming everyone works the same way. I mean, I'm a huge fan of, I think procedures and policies and processes can be so effective in your organisation and ensure consistency, but I think sometimes uniform expectations can be quite exclusive, and I also don't think it naturally reflects the diversity of thought which would and should exist amongst your team. And neurodivergent staff in particular might need different approaches to be able to thrive, and that's okay. It's not about giving somebody special treatments in inverted commas. It's putting everyone on an even keel to be able to carry out their roles, and again, that ties in with the legal responsibility to make reasonable adjustments and strategies that we can put in place so can actually help the whole team. For example, I've touched on it before about communication, which a neurodivergent colleague might struggle with, or have particular needs that they like to give or receive feedback. We have something at Thrive called our License to Thrive, and it's a document that anyone joining the team is asked to complete. It's a living and breathing document, so we constantly review it and update it. But it's exactly that, how we best communicate. If I'm having my focus time, what's the best way to get a hold of me? So it encourages a relationship of respect, but it also, again, helps us to understand one another and how we work best together. And so it can be, I say, a really, really effective tool, and as it benefits everybody, regardless of whether you have a neurodivergent condition or not. I think it's definitely importantly for me is not waiting for a formal diagnosis before offering support. And it's something we mentioned briefly earlier, but it's something where we do see a lot of employers fall down on practice as well. Legal obligations are triggered when someone informs you of a medical condition. You don't need to have a formal diagnosis for the employer to be on notice of that. And particularly, as I say, if someone's struggling, you should make adjustments based on their need, not just medical paperwork. Obviously, that can add further insight and recommendations, which are really will help you actually to aid those conversations. So you're making use, for example, of occupational health, or even the individual's GP if they have good support in place there to be able to aid those conversations. But what it won't do and shouldn't do is replace us having that natural conversation with the person who you're looking to support.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, really important.
Okay, well, let's move on to another topic. I think, Matthew, what's in your practice the most common myths or missteps in your experience?
I think myths or missteps. I think the biggest one is just a little bit of fear around like what shouldn't we be doing. I think that depending on the journey, lots of organisations are way ahead of this, but we do speak to a lot who are like, we want to do something, but we don't quite know what to do, and maybe a bit of a fear of like it's going to cost money or it's going to be a big project. Actually, you can start really small, and whether that's internal resource or going externally to get that support to fast track certain things. But in terms of like day-to-day like misconceptions, I think one thing that happens a lot without necessarily being too obvious is I think managers or neurotypical people don't quite understand the day-to-day impact. So they can understand that for dyslexia it might be a little bit more difficult to read, let's say, generalizing here, or for ADHD might forget an appointment or might submit work late or like whatever it might be. It's very easy to think that there isn't that battle and that barrier going on all the time. And I think it's just realizing the significant impact that diagnosis has on a day-to-day. If you're reading through work as a dyslexic individual, you are constantly fighting, rereading, trying to memorize words that would take the person sat next to you who doesn't have dyslexia probably 3 times faster that they can read. And if you add that up across the year, it's really significant. So it's having that awareness and that empathy and understanding, I think that is really important. And then not having that kind of like, oh, well, everyone has a bit of ADHD traits, or everyone can be disorganized, or no one likes deadlines, or no, like it's yeah, okay, that happens throughout the population. But if that is part of someone's diagnosis, it's a significant impact and isn't just a kind of little bit. The diagnosis first element that Laura's just touched upon, maybe like what external support government will help or support. So access to work will just come in and kind of cover this area for us and we don't need to do anything. But actually looking at time frames and waiting for access to work, both the assessment process, but then also the kind of strategy implementation, the AT is all really lengthy now. And you've got an employee sat in limbo and not able to perform as well as they could do. Not being fair on like the whole team. I think we get that quite a lot. Like, oh, but why should we support this individual and not the rest of the team? And I think that if you've got the culture set right and the communication across that whole team, everyone understands that actually if we can make Matthew more efficient or more productive, the whole team benefits from this. This isn't just a kind of like, oh, there's preferential treatment over here on his side. It's like, okay, right, we're able to hit our targets now, or we'll be able to perform much better. And then having a bank of like adjustments, or being aware of what like common adjustments are, is super helpful. But not thinking I'm going to ram these all down everyone's throat, and it's like that everyone's going to fit to these 10 adjustments that I've read on Google Help. It's about finding and listening and understanding what adjustment is most effective. Yeah, I think that off the top of my and in terms of some of the key things. What about your side, Laura? Anything that's
I think what you mentioned there
is
it's so common, and we see it both from obviously employer side. Individual employees coming to us saying, it's taken this long, nothing's really happened. I'm concerned there's been a failure to make reasonable adjustments, and what's happened is actually we're sitting around waiting for access to work to give us all the answers or put something in place, and it's a lot of almost onus on the employee to bring the solution and bring it. And I think there's such a missed window opportunity to be able to have those conversations and move things along. And obviously, yes, it's fantastic to have the support available through access to work, but there's definitely, I say, things you can be doing in the meantime. And it's that sort of broader impact as well in terms of affecting the relationship with the employee, treating it as a very sort of formulaic process. And I think also it's balanced with, like, I know you touched on there about, well, it's a special idea of special treatments, and it's not, it's just one person saving all our energy, and actually the energy and the time might take is if we don't support that individual. But also we commonly get asked about, well, there's got this concern about how do I balance flexibility for that individual, but also our business needs. And I don't think it should be this combative approach. And that's one of the kind of common misconceptions for me is, yes, but I think there's definitely a meeting in the middle in terms of absolutely meeting your commercial requirements, the needs you have from the role, from the business. Again, in at the same time, supporting that individual and putting certain adjustments in place to be able to support them. And, there's sometimes you have to have a conversation with things. We're talking about reasonable adjustments here, and what is reasonable for one business might be different to another, albeit the bar's set relatively high in terms of expectations as to what an employer should be doing. It's around that conversation about, well, let's practically sit down, you look at that person's role, what do they need? What is what we need from you as a business? How can we make that happen? How can we support you to achieve those aims? So it's really a collaborative approach, really, in terms of achieving those goals. And in turn, the employee feels supported. You like to get the best out of that person. You've got their full engagement with the appropriate support in place, or if something is going to be a very practical, and we can evidence it's very practical and real challenge to put a particular adjustment in place. Again, having that conversation, is there an alternative way we can do this? Do we need to look more broadly at their role? And again, looking at the strengths and what they are bringing, the reason why we hired them in the first place in terms of their technical ability and creativity and what we've hired them to do. There's definitely that sweet spot can be met, and less of a combative approach about it all.
Yeah, completely. And I think that as you're looking through all of these kind of areas, another question that we get asked, and I'm conscious of time in terms of the questions that we're going to hopefully get through, but one is definitely about kind of flexibility, like what's the kind of balance between flexibility and like business needs. So just to super quickly touch on that, because I think it is key to lots of people's like budgets and resources. It's about balancing what is reasonable to that organisation, but also flipping adjustments into like looking at as an investment. So what return on investment am I getting from this? And there was a Deloitte study, I think, can't remember the date of it now, but it was somewhere between 4 and 5 times return on investment when you're looking at neuro-inclusive practices. So it's not necessarily about like bottom line or costs. It's like what am I getting back for some of these? And then I'm sure, like Laura, from your side, in terms of like retaining talent and attrition costs, then you're going to save loads of that from a resource perspective there.
Yeah, I think just following on from what you were saying, really, I think investing early to stop spending a lot later on down the line when things, hopefully they don't do, but worst case scenario, things go wrong. I say I'm seeing it at the raw end from the side of tribunals potentially, but I think also, like you mentioned there, about your attrition costs and actually retaining good talent as well, because that's really going to think, because it's lots of businesses are having to sort of restructure and becoming much more leaner in their in the way they're formed, and so having the best people in the right jobs is definitely key here.
Absolutely. So moving on to question 4, what do we or what should we do when an employee discloses that they are neurodivergent, and where do you start?
So I think for me, first thing is don't panic and don't be scared. I think listen as well. Don't ignore them as well. Don't put a bit of an ostrich syndrome, put your heads in the sand. And also don't expect to have all the answers straight away. As I say, it's a conversation starter. It's understanding what they feel they might need as an individual, getting the appropriate guidance from a medical professional, whether that's occupational health of the individual's GP, or bringing some, one of the fantastic organisations such as Aim Forward in to help guide that process as well. I think showing support and getting the right support input and guidance and discussing with the employee is really key. And it's actually quite a simple thing here. So I say, don't be scared. And we advise clients on a practical and individual basis as well, but we also deliver awareness training sessions as a firm. It's something we specialise in to help improve that confidence for organisations. Yeah, they're my sort of my key tips, I think, on that one. What about you, Matthew?
I feel like you could do a whole session just on that question. how do we do it? But I think just top level, I guess listening and asking open questions for me is where it all starts. Normally the individual will actually hold the answers, and it's about asking the right questions and then deciding, what is reasonable, which is where we kind of do a lot of our work in terms of workplace needs assessments, and being able to kind of actually state what those adjustments might look like to take that pressure off organisations. But yeah, it's asking questions and listening, I think, from my side. So I think the next bit in terms of a question of like, can adjustments be informal or do they need to be documented? I think that I think we've talked about this before in terms of that kind of psychologically safe space. I think that if an employee is feels safe and supported at work, they're both more likely to disclose initially, but then also happy to have that documented, because you would feel a little bit nervous of who's seeing this information, where is it going to, could it impact my relationship with my line manager, or could it impact my career prospects? But I think that having that kind of culturally safe space removes a lot of that, and it builds on that trust, so that people are much more likely to both disclose and feel comfortable to kind of have that documented. What's your take, Laura, in terms of like, what if we don't get this right?
So, well, I know we've seen firsthand the benefit of your workplace assessments in practice, but I think the cost of getting it wrong can be significant. I mean, in terms of if a discrimination claim is brought, potentially it's uncapped compensation, the most serious of cases, if things just haven't been dealt with appropriately. And that can have an impact, not just financially, but also reputationally. We've all seen the impact of social media, and obviously certain trouble judgments can be potentially public knowledge, but also it's the time and cost internally as well of dealing with the tribunal claim potentially, just for not considering a simple adjustments for simple support. And the problem wasn't bad intent; it tends to be inaction in the cases that have been brought to light.
I just think it's going to improve, or it's going to change, or like we don't have to do anything. It'd be more risky if we did something than if we didn't.
Well, that's it. And I think obviously there's a reputational impact, but also you're thinking about talent retention and recruitment as well. One of the first places people will go to see, is this a company I want to go and work for, is checking them out on social media, looking at their profile, what's popping at the top of Google when I put this company name in. And if actually it's been something that's been handled, probably support hasn't been in place, then as I say, you might have a broader impact as well.
Absolutely. And yeah, if support gets brought in too, like if we get brought in too late, it's already happened, or the trust is starting to break down. It's very difficult to get that back. It does work. We definitely see turnarounds, but it's far easier to start early when it's positive than if something's gone wrong.
Well, I think just quickly, as a final question from me, and I think we can do a bit of a wrap up. So thank you for those people who are staying with us. Just final question from me, Matthew. How do we go about then building a culture where people do feel safe to speak up?
I guess it's where it all kind of pulls together and all kind of connects. I think adjustments are great, so strategies and reasonable adjustments. But if someone doesn't feel safe to say, I'm finding this difficult, or this would help me, then none of the kind of policies matter. It's about how it actually happens in real life. And where we see the biggest wins is if you can kind of approach from a few different areas. So from our side, if you're looking at the kind of pyramid of an organisation, you could have some top-down training starting with like the leadership, so it filters through the organisation, and then embed assessments all the way from foundation through to the top, so that you've got kind of two areas of kind of traction and conversation around this, and that really fast tracks that culture change. It starts with individuals in assessments and wider teams in training, but really start people having those kind of conversations and starts that culture change. How do you find from a more legal perspective?
Yeah, well, even from a legal perspective, and the cultural approach that you take really counts. If someone feels silenced or fearful, and that leads them to be being treated less favourably or put at a disadvantage, for example, due to a provision, criteria, or practice of putting into place, it could lead to a claim of discrimination, even if no one meant to cause any harm. And we've seen it so effectively with some of the clients that we work with, in terms of building trust, having those transparent processes, communicating those support options well. Really puts them in a strong position, both from as a business, but also supporting that individual as well. And we've talked about it as a word we've used many times today, and it's really so important about developing that psychologically safe environment for your workplace is really key here, and something that we've seen firsthand can have that longer term impact. And part of that is creating that environment of openness where employees can share their stories if they feel able to do so, and that might inspire others to open up and share their needs as well. And this cultural shift really does have to come from the leaders in any organisation, in my view.
Yeah, and I think just to touch on a side point is in terms of, we are talking about neurodiversity in general here and neurodivergent conditions, but it also is relevant for mental health conditions or medical conditions or sensory conditions, it's a wider approach where all of these conversations can happen.
Definitely. So it's a bit of a round then. Where should someone start if they want to make a change?
Big question, and probably the most common one when we first start to talk to organisations. Where do we start with this? We want to do something. What should we do? My take would always be start small, but start now. Like, don't just keep putting this off. Make some traction towards that change. So first off, listen, ask open questions, and learn. I think introducing some like low cost or low effort changes in terms of like environmental adjustments benefit everyone in the organisation. Sharing from leadership roles, like Laura's mentioned, I think creating that space and that opportunity to talk and be a little bit vulnerable and have those conversations, I think is super helpful. And then I think that fast tracking this process can really help. I think that if you're wanting change, normally it needs to be triggered. So you need to start with small, but start to see what that path is. How do I go from point A to point B, or to C to D, and how quickly can I kind of fast track that? Because normally this culture is going to be beneficial to kind of the culture change will be beneficial to everyone in the organisation. What's your sort of thoughts, Laura?
Well, I think the fact that people are here today engaged in this conversation shows that, quite honestly, they're on the right track. I mean, from a legal perspective, you're reviewing your current policies and procedures that you've got in place. Are they up to date, for one? Are they proactive or are they reactive? Having a look at how the impact of those, are they being used well? Are they accessible and inclusive? Is everyone aware of them? Do they know where they can locate them? Can they access them easily, or have they got to ask somebody for access to a particular policy? Simple things like that are definitely worth review and audit. But also documenting any conversations and actions that you take. So I think this shows that you've thought it through, and it's helpful evidence if ever you are challenged to have that note of what's been done, that trail of conversation and communication that you've had with the individual concerned. And I know I've touched on it many times today, but it's so important about ensuring manager confidence, and training can be key here. So do your managers know what they need to do if someone comes to them to ask for support? And I think final point for me is, remember, you don't need to be perfect, you need to be intentional and evidencing the steps that you're taking.
Absolutely. So one last poll. There was loads of positive reactions to this initial poll. So that, like, how confident are you in terms of kind of neuro-inclusive practices? There was lots of positivity in the first poll. Hopefully that doesn't go down from listening to us talk. That's the last poll from us. And then just a sign off to say thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that it's given a kind of sense of what's possible, and also kind of that permission to kind of start small, but also to sort of see how that kind of culture change can benefit the wider organisation.